My name is Christina Kovacs, and this is The Chaos Inside. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Previously on here, we had Andrea, who was incarcerated at the Indiana Women's Prison, who talked about COVID and what her experience was like, how the facility decided to handle the COVID pandemic. And so I think that I really appreciate you joining us today. We have a staff member a previous staff member who had worked at both a men's facility and a women's facility. And she's going to talk to us today about kind of what her experience was like as a staff member. So if you could just kind of tell us about your experience prior to your transfer and how COVID was being handled there.
Sure. Um, so I was, I've been in corrections for probably about four years on and off. I was also a police officer outside of this. The beginning of probably about the beginning of this year, when everything started to peak for the COVID or begin to show uh, in the prison system, I guess. Um, the facility that I was at prior to IWP was more equipped, and it had a lot more veteran staff. And that's a lot, it helps a lot because you can be quick to change protocol, policy, anything, any of your day-to-day operations. Um, I think that was a pretty big factor in the ways of how it was handled. I mean, I worked the night shift, and we would be responsible for serving breakfast. So we'd start breakfast after our last count of the morning, which was 3 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, we started pretty early. Our shift ended at 6, so we were usually done with breakfast probably around like 4:30, 5 o'clock at the very latest. But in the beginning, we didn't have, they went on lockdown as well. However, it wasn't necessarily, uh, it was still free range kind of because they had access, even in the open dorms that aren't in a cell, they had access to bathrooms. We didn't close them out of their day rooms, and where they would be able to, we just kept them segregated from each unit. So there'd be 4 units in a housing unit. In the open dorms, we would keep they'd kind of be set up like pods type, it'd be a type thing, because we'd have anywhere from, I'd probably say about 80 to 90 men in each pod. So 4 units, it could get pretty hectic at times. But I specifically remember I was food boss one morning. I was in charge of running chow, and it was our first attempt at doing this on complete lockdown. So we had discussed I had gotten together with my kitchen officer, and we figured out a plan to get through the breakfast feed without any hiccups. I mean, it ran a lot longer than it usually is. It ran into the next shift, but
Right.
we talked. The Airmark staff that ran the kitchen praised us very well about having to. We opened up the back gates. Custody staff was actually delivering food to each unit, so we'd have the guys come in, cook breakfast, and we'd load it up on the back of a pickup truck, and we'd start from one end of the camp and work our way back down. And it was pretty organized system for the most part. But as far as anything else, there was no movements. Medication was passed out inside the dorms. Um, the the one thing that I would say that they were more beneficial for, was there's a door to get into the day room. So it'll break up into 3 sections. So the bedding area would be in the back, an emergency door to get through to the back, and
Mhm.
have their latrine area, and then they have their day room area. So what we did was we would call everybody out one row at a time to go through and either pick up their trays for food and come back and get through with their medication. But we keep them in the day room so they can eat and not have to eat on their beds.
Right.
Which was one of the things that was weird at IWP was they had no privilege to the day room. There was no access to the day room, period. When I came over there, I had asked a lot of questions as well as like, are we getting this here? Who's going to be doing all of this? And they laid it all on custody staff, which is fine. But I mean, there's more hands, there's more capable people as opposed to like the lack of staff that there is over there, basically, which put a lot of work on certain individuals, like the 5 and 2 staff, which are there Monday through Friday. But it was way more organized over at my old facility than it was at IWP. It was a giant cluster, and it didn't stop being that until I wouldn't even say June or July, just because of the whole simple fact of the matter was the the whole closing of the doors, and no one really knew what was going on for the most part, and there was a lot of miscommunication over there as well.
I'm gonna back you up a little bit. So before you had transferred the facilities, the were these just precautionary measures that the men's facility was taking because of COVID, or had cases already started breaking out there, or
It was more of a precautionary measures. We hadn't had before I left, which was so from January until probably about the end of March was when I left at the end of March. We hadn't had any cases of COVID, and it was all precautionary measures. We were provided with face masks, gloves, gowns, everything, and honestly, the guys were off lockdown shortly after I left.
Okay.
And they weren't even in full lockdown until mid-February, when it was actually like when it was starting to uh, when the outbreaks actually were starting to come to light, I guess.
okay, okay. So then you transfer to IWP, and can you kind of talk about like what it looked like there? Um, we we had Andrea on here who told us that now there's the big building, which is has manual locks and unlock, or I'm sorry, automatic locks
And unlocks.
the cottages have manual. But can you, from an officer's perspective or a sergeant's perspective, what was it like for you to have to, I guess, enforce that?
So uh, at my former facility, there's not a lot of automatic locking doors. 90% of the time, they were broken. So we worked with that. And it was a lot of the times it was both ends of the sticks. Either the offenders were, messing with their locks or, something along those lines, or just faulty wiring or technical difficulties in our control room. But at no point in time was there was always an officer on the unit to go and unlock the doors. And on one side, so our cell houses were the ones that were like that. I mean, there's 43 doors, both on the bottom floor. Well, there's 19 on the bottom floor, and there's obviously the rest on the top floor. But the there was no enforcing. You went and did all of your. You didn't have to enforce all that. And then when I came to IWP, I was just so confused because I specifically remember my first roll call. I had looked around and I said, "Ah, I'm the only sergeant here." I was like, "Huh, that's weird," because I had never done that. Had never been a thing. So my old facility, there was 7 housing units, just 7.
So how many sergeants would you have expected to be on that shift? Because IWP has between 600 and 700.
Women at a
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I think the last it was like 690 something. Well, the last number I remember. It was it was weird. But probably would have expected at least two more, because I mean, we had a sergeant for each housing unit. I assumed that was kind of the case over here or over at IWP, but I mean, even on a bad day at my old facility, we'd still have at least four sergeants. So I mean, at the most, you'd have maybe two or three housing units, which is it's not bad when you run two or three housing units. Just for the simple fact of the matter is you have veteran staff. You have that one person who knows what they're doing. They're usually on post on the desk. And then you, at the minimum, would have two other staff members. So, like officers. So you'd have one officer running two pods, basically. And then you'd have the desk officer controlling all of the movement coming out. So, you know, they'd communicate, hey, we need to get the chapel movement out and have them staged in the lobby and ready to go, and then they communicate with the walk officers and stuff like that. But when I came and I was the walk sergeant at IWP, it was so confusing and so stressful and like physically exhausting. I ended up I never had a Fitbit or anything like that, but I had gotten one shortly after I had started there because I was very curious about how it was, what was going on. I was walking anywhere from 13 to 15 miles a night.
Wow.
In a 12-hour period.
Wow.
It's unnecessary. The double
it's
counting.
really
That huge of a campus.
No, it's
You
not.
So that is a lot.
That is a lot of walking.
Yes, I cover probably at least 20,000 steps before midnight.
Wow.
I'd never sit down until probably about right before the Airmark staff came in, before they started calling out the kitchen crew in the morning. That would be probably be about an hour, maybe 2 hours if I hadn't been, you know, getting called over the radio to go signal somewhere just to go over there. But I mean, there should at least be, I know the numbers aren't there for that much staff, but there should be more supervisors, because probably I'll go with 8 times out of 10, I was the only one that was a supervisor in camp. And then I'd have a lieutenant or a captain, and it'd literally be myself, a lieutenant, and captain on a responder team. And per policy, if you really want to be particular about it, that shift office is not supposed to be unmanned, because if something were to happen and somebody were to take over, that's your command post, is the shift office. So technically that should not be unmanned. But I mean, it's just, it was a...
When you arrived at IWP, were they already all on lockdown? Like programming had been shut down, there was no rec going on, they were being locked in.
And their cell taking place.
So the only thing that was taking place was, actually, I'm pretty sure they had just shut down the chapel services, because I specifically remember meeting the chaplain, and then the other guy that worked there, I can't remember his name, but they were there, and I was the only reason I actually saw them because I was on day shift training for 2 weeks, and we were packing the sacks. That's all they were getting was sacks every day.
Which consisted of what?
What
4 pieces of bread, some bologna, depending on the day, I guess. Bologna, there'd be a cookie, fairly that big, maybe if they were lucky. If it was peanut butter, which is the grossest colored peanut butter I've ever seen, that and a packet of jelly. And then they'd have like mayo and mustard packets. That would be it. Like, it would be bologna or peanut butter.
And were they getting sacks 3 times a day?
Just about. They'd have one hot meal a day, if that. When it was at the beginning, they would have one hot meal, and and those were the trays that we were delivering. But a lot of the times it was the sack lunches, and we'd be passing those out as well. But
Wow.
it was so much bread.
Mm.
So okay, so
You got
there and they had just shut down the chapel services, correct?
So yeah, so they weren't having any volunteers coming in either. They had just shut that down because I know they had previously shut down for visitors about the same time my old facility did. They almost did that. I think back in February, my old facility did, but they were still running chapel services. Um, but yeah, when I had got there, they had just shut. That was the last thing I think they finally shut down.
Okay. And so we're so then after you had been there, that's when they started locking them in their rooms, right?
They were locked down. They were probably about 80% locked down when I first got there, and then as soon as it was probably about April, mid-April, they finally just shut it all down. There was no movements, no nothing. We couldn't pull if we needed any wheelchair pushers or anything like that. We couldn't pull from anywhere. Specifically, the Plus program, that whole dorm was completely shut down because there had been um, a positive test over there. So somebody had contracted the COVID, and it was completely shut down the whole program, and that just caused all kinds of headaches. So much.
Yeah, because Plus would do a lot of the volunteer work around the prison. They would have MMAs, which would push the wheelchairs,
suicide.
watch, and they also had where they would help people up in the infirmary. I forget what that's called, but so okay, so on the Plus unit, the first person gets COVID. They tested them for it.
Allegedly, I've never seen them. I don't know what they do, what their test entails. I've never seen it. So I don't know if it's because I've been tested, just because, third parties have, got sick, not even COVID related, but just any kind of precautionary measures. But I mean, I haven't, I've never seen them test anything because, I don't know where they keep the extra long Q-tips in the infirmary that go all the way up your nose and into your brain. But
Right.
so mine was painful. So,
Yeah.
but I've never seen them test anybody. I couldn't answer either way for that. But I will say, one of the ER runs that I did go out on, which was there was an offender in the infirmary. She was having respiratory issues, and she was in rough shape. Um, and the nurse had finally said that she was going out. So I was the only handgun qualified um, person, I guess. And we had gone out to I think it was Eskenazi.
Hmm.
I want to say it was Eskenazi, and they tested. It was in minutes, and they're like, "Yeah, she's got COVID." And I was like, "Great!" So she was in a group room, and first of all, I've never seen anything like that specifically in my entire 4 whole years of corrections. A group room where there's 10 people. The first time I went in there, I'm like, "What is this?" And I looked around, and I'm like, "Oh, it's the group room." I'm like, "This can't be safe." So, so I don't know. It's just that was just something. So everybody. So what they did after that was just baffling. It made no sense whatsoever. So what they did was they shut down that group room and they quarantined it. So it was on Unit 12 in the big building, obviously. So anytime anybody, those group rooms lock, you would assume, but they do. Someone found a way to lock those doors, and they ended up locking that one door just because there's always be one person wandering out to the bathroom.
Right.
Because how they wanted it was the group room had to be segregated from the rest of the unit. So anytime anybody with the group room had a bathroom, everybody would have to clear it. Not that there was everybody out, but the day room would have to be clear, allegedly, and they would have to go and use bathroom, do their thing, and then go back to the group room. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but there are 10 women in that group room, and there are 25 cells with 2 women in each cell. So you have 50 women to 10 that have to go to the bathroom. And there's every time that I was working, there was myself and 1 officer. So you have 1 officer running 4 units. And
So just to
Kind of give people a description of this. So when you walk into the big building, you go down this long hall, and then you come to the center, which is control. And there's 4 right there, isn't there?
yep,
So there's 8, 9, 13, and 12, correct?
correct.
yeah,
And then you go down another hall, and that will take you back to 11, which is segregation.
And then there's
Also unit 10 back there.
yep,
And so they control all of the automatic doors in that entire building.
yes.
And there was only you and 1 other officer.
there.
In the front half, yeah, in the front half, and then the back half, there would be 1 officer on 10, and then there would be 1 officer on unit 11, which,
Okay, yeah.
I mean, you'd never really, like, if you were working control, you never really would have to work the doors in the back. Very rarely you would have to, but I mean, 25 doors for 4 units, that's 100, you're working 100 doors, plus they added the simple fact of the matter is you had a group room that was segregated in unit 12 that you would have to go in and do that. My favorite thing was, and I never understood this, so the supervisor, I had my sergeant keys, and the officer would pull their keys for their prospective units. Their keys for the big building never opened the front doors, like to the units. It made no sense to me. Like, you would have to pull, yeah, you would have to pull control keys or the sergeant's keys. And it's just, so I would go back onto unit 10 and I'd be like, hey, let me in to the officer who's on the unit. And they're like, oh, the key. I don't have the key. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have the key? No, I'm on the doors. So I was like, this also can't be safe.
Right.
I think they were when I left, I think they were in the works of reworking all of those keys. But that was something that I had raised questions about, like, why would you put an officer here that can't get out of the unit?
Right.
Well, we have the doors on control too. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I have 100 other doors to work, and you're just sitting here pushing this button, you know.
Were you always over the big building, or were you ever over the cottages?
No, when I first got there, the other sergeant that I was working with, he had his whole family got the COVID, so he was out for like a month.
Wow.
So my first month there, I was the only supervisor on camp. So besides the captain and lieutenant, so me not knowing the facility and how it runs and how it works, I was kind of learning how as I was going. But it was just I had basically the whole camp my first month there, and I'd have all 7 cottages, and then I'd have to go run back to the big building. Especially the suicide watches and stuff like that. They have the weird policy, which I still don't get, where you would have to have 2 officers and a sergeant with their spray pulled for the aggressive offenders that were in segregation, which I personally never pulled my spray, but someone mentioned to me like, hey, we're supposed to do this, and I'm like, why? They're in cuffs. I'm not spraying anybody in cuffs because that's a terrible idea.
Right.
So it was just there was a lot of confusing policies and procedures and a lot of made up things on the fly that I've never heard of.
Right. So when the heat really hit,
And
so like in June, it was horrible. And on the cottages, these doors were locked. They had to be manually locked and unlocked. They didn't have toilets or sinks, sprinkler systems or anything like that in the cell. So did you ever hear or see of any medical emergencies pertaining to like the heat or anything that you had to address?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably say about maybe twice a week. And that's not including any of the day shift. There was always seizure. I mean, heat-related seizures are a thing. I was a lifeguard in Disney. Heat strokes and heat-related seizures are a thing,
Mm.
and um I specifically remember because this was Unit 5, and this specific unit had an officer fall out because of the heat.
Wow.
Um, they had just started rolling out rec, and I was running rec as the walk sergeant, and I had gotten called from an officer to come and signalate Unit 5, which means to go over to his position. So
Mhm.
I had gone over there, and this soon as I went in there, there was a handful of women that were surrounding one specific offender in a wheelchair who was, she was nodding in and out. She had no idea what was going on, and she was, excuse me, clearly having a heat stroke, um, or a heat related thing because I'm not medical, but so I looked at the officer who's standing all the way at the desk. Like, she's at the front of the day room. Like, as soon as you walk in, you have that little teeny hallway, and then you have the day room. She was over, closer to the door in the day room, and the officer's all the way down on the desk, and he's just looking at me. And I looked over there, and I was like, "You don't want to call this?" And he just kind of did one of these, and I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm calling it." And so I called the Signal 3000,
Oh
and
my
then which was for a medical emergency. Um, because I had asked her questions because this is what you're supposed to do. Um, from my training and experience, I
God.
don't necessarily know about their training and experience. But you're supposed to ask them questions, the who's, what, when. She couldn't give me her DOC number, she couldn't give me her name. She really couldn't even get anything out. So I had told a couple of the girls that were around her, I was like, go get some ice, which was very scarce to begin with. I said, go get some ice, find a towel or rag or whatever, and we'll put them underneath her armpits to kind of cool her body down. Um, so the nurse finally came and I got mean mugged and said, who called this? And I was like, I did. So, like, you kind of got scolded for doing something like that. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I've had an offender die on me, and it is not fun at all. Mine was there was a lack of medical care, there was a lack of everything medical, period. Um, and uh, it messed me up for a minute, and I don't mess around with anything medical, period. I always call because I not medical. It was very stress. It was stress to me a lot that I'm not medical. So
So kind of explain like the atmosphere towards um I guess like the way that you were told to be towards the women, like um was it different than who you are, or like, I mean, people think that you're in prison so you should be treated like you're in prison, and that you should be treated horribly, but that first of all, DOC likes to cover a lot of it up, right? Like, they wanted to deny any of the medical emergencies pertaining to the heat at the Indiana Women's Prison,
mhm.
which we knew were false because we had heard from the individuals in there that it was taking place. And
Mhm.
not only that, we had been there before, and with the doors open, the summer is just absolutely stifling.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, it's just
pure
awful.
misery.
Yeah.
Uh,
But it's more than just bad treatment. Like, it's completely inhumane, in my opinion. What is your takeaway from the atmosphere that IWP enforces towards people in there?
So I'll give you a for instance, which I believe I spoke to you yesterday with. So I was involved at my old facility in a use of force where I ended up having to deploy OC.
Hmm.
And I had been, the offender, he was extremely high, completely out of his mind, and very combative. I ended up getting kicked, not very hard, didn't leave me any bruises or anything like that, but it was something that led me to, he kicked me, so therefore I deployed by OC.
Okay.
So that happened on a Thursday night. So that was, we had worked Wednesday and Thursday. So then we would be off Monday, or I mean, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I'd come back Monday. So for that specific instance, sprayed him with OC. He was so high that we could not get the cuffs off of him, whether they were wrist restraints or the leg irons. We had to physically go in the shower with him because we could not get him to push the button to decontaminate himself.
Wow.
He had no idea what was going on. So he he sat in that OC spray for almost 2 hours. By the time we finally were able to get him to, we got him in the shower, but it was, he wouldn't let himself decontaminate. Like the second the water hit him, he's like, no, 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 I gotta get out. Yeah. So we let him, chill out, whatever. And by the time we finally got calmed down, we finally got the restraints and everything. So that was on a Thursday. He was in my unit Monday when I came in to work Monday night at 6 o'clock. He was in my unit.
Not in any kind of disciplinary trouble. He was back living in general population.
Yes. Which I went up to the guy and I'm like, hey man, how's it going? And I just kind of looked at him and he's like, what'd you spray me, Sarge? And I was like, well, you kicked me, so I kind of had to. So
Right.
he's like, okay, that's fair. So, and I walked him up to medical because his eyes looked pretty rough. I mean, he ate that OC, like mouth wide open and everything, and it didn't even phase him. That was the worst part because I've been sprayed and it sucks.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good, does it?
Um,
I've never been sprayed directly, but I've
Yeah.
and indirect effects of it, and it's
No.
fun.
yeah, I think I've been sprayed a total, but I think 3 times, and it's just not fun. And I've been tased, and that's the worst. But I'll take OC over tase every day of the week. So, but, so for the men, he on paper assaulted me. It was out that weekend. He came back to general population. Another instance, I had dealt at IWP with a specific female for 2 hours prior to we actually getting her to where she wanted to go. And the wanting was the key word because she was doing this for alternative measures. But she had came to me, she was on grace, which is, I don't think is, I'm not a fan of that unit and how that is an actual thing. It makes no sense to me. So,
Another
Conversation I would like to have with you later. Yeah.
that makes no sense to me. So this specific female, she had said, and I had actually had to deal with her quite a bit in this one specific week. She could talk her way out of a paper bag. Like it was just what she was very good with her words.
Yeah.
So she wanted to she didn't feel safe in her unit and she said to me she wanted to check in. And I was like, okay.
Clarify what check-in means for everybody.
So a check-in or checking in you're requesting protective custody.
Okay.
And per policy, if you're in fear for your life, you don't feel safe in your environment, and you're not like if you request protective custody, you should not go back to the unit that you're requesting protective custody from.
Okay.
So I was like, what do you mean you want to check in? And I had asked what was the reasoning behind it. And she said, there was this girl who was getting commissary or money put on her books in extracurricular ways. So, and she didn't feel safe. So I was like, okay, hold on, let me go back and phone call. Because that's literally my training and experience, that's all it would take. Be like, hey, I got a guy who's requesting PC,
Right.
and they're like, okay, I have to. So at my facility, at the old facility, how that whole process works is the sergeant takes care of it, the supervisor takes care of it. Um, I would pull them into a secure location, which would most likely be my office, which was nice because I had an office and I didn't have one there. So I had my office. I'd pull him in and be like, "Hey man, what's going on?" It's usually he would rack up a debt. He'd piss off the Aryans or any other kind of gang. My favorite was Super Bowl Sunday. So all the bags of commissary. But so we would, I would then ask him a series of questions. So it would be a PC questionnaire, and I'd fill it out and everything, and I'd have to take him to medical to go get evaluated, make sure he wasn't suicidal or anything like that, and then I would take him to segregation
Mm-hmm.
and I'd put him in the holding cell for probably maybe about an hour or so until they found a bed for him in the protective custody unit, which that specific thing, a protective custody unit, does not exist at the Indiana Women's Prison. It's not a thing. There's no PC whatsoever. I mean, unless they use it as segregation, but there's not enough. There's not enough cells.
Right.
So I tried to explain to this female, and I said, "Hey, that's not a thing here." She's like, "Well, I've been getting the runaround all week." I was like, "Wait, you've been trying to check in for an entire week, and you haven't been able to get anywhere." So at the time, she had another offender with her who was also trying to do the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it was actually documented on the other offender that she had talked to a lieutenant or a captain about requesting protective custody, and she got put right back in her unit. So, and the same thing would happen with the one that was trying to check in with me. So I had called my lieutenant, and I was like, "Hey, I got this going on, blah blah blah." And then the immediate answer, which it frustrated me because it was literally their go-to answer every time. Well, she's just trying to get back there to go be with her girlfriend. Every time, no matter what any offender was trying to do, that's what their answer was. She's just trying to go back there to be here with the girlfriend. Okay, so you're not going to, it's not up to you whether or not she's um, qualified for protective custody.
Right.
That's not your decision to make. There's a whole committee. Well, there's supposed to be a whole committee and everything like that. There's some specific person that oversees all of this. And like with the guys, so if they check in on a Friday, they're not getting seen until Monday. So they're at least in protective custody for 3 days.
Right.
So they can get seen by, the guy who's over that specific unit. So, and if he decides that their allegations, any reasoning why they're requesting this isn't valid or doesn't pose an immediate threat, they'll go right back to general population. But the trick is they won't go back to the unit that they checked out of. So
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
so they'll get put in general population, but it would usually be on like the other end of camp.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah, though I had tried to explain this to I realize now where I was going. So sorry.
That's all right. It's useful information.
Yeah, well,
People don't realize the disparity between the way that the women's prison is ran and the treatment versus the men's.
yeah. So with this particular female, she had given me the runaround for like the past 2 hours after this, um, after I spoke to my lieutenant. So she had said, she's now wanting to she wanted to harm herself. So she was claiming she wanted to go on suicide watch.
Mm-hmm.
So I had gotten them both out of their unit at this point, and we were on our way to medical, and then that's when she voiced up and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this. I want to go on suicide watch." So
And for the record, so PC Suicide Watch is all in segregation if you are going to go on any of those.
Yeah.
At IWP at least.
So, I knew what was going to happen from probably about within the first 15 minutes of talking to her. I knew she wasn't going to back down because she wanted to go be with her girlfriend, which is, it's whatever. But I knew I was going to have to eventually put hands on her. And I was literally doing everything in my power to avoid it because she is, she was like 100 pounds soaking wet.
Right.
So my lieutenant and the other sergeant had finally come over because I was done. I had outstretched all of my reasonings, I guess. And I even tried to explain to her, and I told her, I said, listen, there's no such thing as PC. I was like, you're just going to go back to say, anyway, it doesn't matter. And I said, at this point, you're just running me around, and we're going on 2 hours now. And I was like, it's almost count time. I don't know what to do with you. You're not going back to your unit. I'm not physically going to put you back into your unit because she wasn't being combative. She wasn't doing anything. She was just there. So she ended up asking me a couple of questions. And she told me, she's like, well, you guys are, once my lieutenant and the other sergeant came, she goes, well, you guys are just going to have to spray me. So she was going back to saying, anyway. And I put my head down and I shook my head because I had the big can. I was like, I'm not spraying her, period. So,
Yeah.
so she ended up caving my lieutenant, and he said, well, fine, we'll get her on suicide watch. And she went to go get seen by medical and stuff like that. And I was done with her. I was done. It was it. It's over with. Um, I get a call over the radio to Signal 8 segregation like 20 minutes later, and I knew exactly what was going on. I knew it was the same chick. So I go back there, and she was refusing to come out of the stall. So since she was on suicide watch, so what that means is when you're claiming suicide or you're claiming you're going to harm yourself, they'll put you in a suicide smock, which I call turtle shell, but it's basically, honestly, couldn't tell you what the material is made out of, but it's supposed to be, you can't tear it apart to use it to harm yourself in any way. But I've seen that happen anyway. So she was getting ready to get a suicide smock. So the segregation officer was female, and she was in the latrine with her, and she was getting ready. She was not coming out of the stall. So the other sergeant that was in there, he was a male, so he couldn't go in there. But if that were the case, and I was at the men's facility, I'd have to go in there as a female. They don't give a shit. I mean, oh, sorry. They don't care. They don't care. Like, I have to go do my rounds in the bathroom as a female and a male. So the double standards there. I get where they're coming from with it, but like, he couldn't do anything. It was basically me and this other female officer, and I'm avoiding to put hands on her. So I'm like, give me the smock. So I literally have the smock. I come down and I was like, here, put this on. She comes out of the stall, and I was like, yes. And then she falls to the ground. And I was like, what? So I put my hands down, and I was like, why? And she's like, you're just gonna have to spray me. I was like, I'm not spraying you. Very explicitly, I'm not spraying you. It's not happening. So she's she's sitting in the fetal position, and I'm just standing there, and I'm like, can you just please put this on? Just put this on, and then we'll be done. And then I'm gonna go, and then we'll be done with this for the day. And it's like 1:30 in the morning. I started dealing with her at 8 o'clock. So I was about at my wit's end. So I looked over at the officer, and I was like, take your adult move. I have to make a phone call. So I called my lieutenant, and verbatim, physically put her in a cell. I don't care what cell, physically put her in a cell. So I hung the phone up, put my head down. I was like, man.
Mm.
So I go in there and I'm like, hey, listen, I don't want to put hands on you, but this is what's going to happen. You're either going to get up and put the smock on, or you're going to let me put the smock on, and then we're going to walk you to your cell, and then we're going to be done with this, or we can do this the hard way. He goes, you're just going to have to spray me. So I turned to the other sergeant who was outside the door. I was like, hey, man, go get me a suicide blanket. I'm going to wrap her up like a burrito, and I'm going to carry her ass out to the cell myself. Like,
Yeah.
I was just going to toss her over my shoulder and just go, because probably would have been less flailing and less things. But
Right.
so he comes back, I grab the blanket, and I go back in, and she was, I grabbed the blanket, and I went to go put it on her, and she moved. She just turned, she didn't do anything. And I'm like, frustrated at this point. I'm like, all right, I'm done. So I went to go put the blanket on, and she ended up like sprawled straight out, and then was like flailing everywhere and fighting this. So the other officer grabbed her by her biceps, and I grabbed her feet because she was, flailing with her feet. So I
Mhm.
just kind of put her feet down, and I went to pull her legs straight, so I just put the blanket on, tuck it underneath her, and go. Um, but she wasn't cooperating. So she ended up kicking me, and I had then put more pressure onto her feet to keep them still.
Mhm.
And the officer that was holding her biceps kept, I didn't know this at the time, but she apparently kept pinching her bicep to the point where she was getting bruises, and she was screaming, "Ow, you're hurting me." I thought it was me because she had leg irons on, and they're not comfortable, period, whether or not you're getting pressure on your feet or not. But I thought it was me, so I let up on my pressure, and I was just holding her ankles at that point. Um, and turns out I had a full blown conversation with her after the fact. Once we had done the use of force, once we had all done our use of force reports and stuff like that, the other officer had put in there that she had kicked me, and I was questioned about it, and he's like, "Well, you're gonna write her up on an A charge, which was assault on staff." And I was like, "Well, do I have to?" He's like, "Well, yeah, she kicked you." I'm like, "Okay." So I ended up having to write her up on an assault charge. She got 9 months in segregation for kicking me. I didn't get sent out to medical, anything like that whatsoever. The guy that kicked me and I sprayed was in there for the, I don't even know if he was in there for the full weekend. But like that's the give and take on that, I guess.
That's
You know.
insane.
Well, and then actually she got another 3 months on top of that. She was in there she's got a year in seg. She had another 3 months on that for a habitual. So that was the week before all of this. I had to deal with her a lot because she was running around camp, and I kept catching her. But the officers kept writing her out. I was like, "Can you just go back to your unit? You're supposed to be out here." And, but it was it's a totally different environment. Like I fully believe that those people hold grudges. Like there's no reason she needed 9 months, and I even talked with her at length about it, and I had questioned. I was like, "Was it me?" And she goes, "No, it wasn't you." And I had ended up I took pictures of her bicep just because of the simple fact I thought it was handprint marks. It wasn't. She's like, she kept pinching me, and she showed me her bicep after the fact. And because that was one of that was actually the night I was working segregation.
Yeah.
So she showed me her bicep, and I'm like, shit, I didn't know she was doing all that. And I had told her, I was like, I thought it was me. She goes, no, you were fine. And, you know, I was like, she goes, I didn't really mean to kick you. I was like, I know that.
Yeah.
But, and it was just, she had asked if she thought, she had asked me if I thought, she should file an ombudsman. And I'm like, I'm not entirely sure what that entails. I've never heard of ombudsman until I came to IWP because
Yeah.
the men don't usually do that.
Right.
Um, So I said, it's not, um, I kind of explained to her the process of the use of force, and I kind of broke it down for her.
Yeah.
Pinching isn't necessarily a thing we're taught. but pressure points, yes. Defensive tactics, yes. A kick to the shins, if you're, whatever, yes. But like anything that you need to do to get yourself out of harm's way as an officer, and if you have to go hands on with an offender, you do by any means necessary, short of, lethal force.
Right.
Pinching isn't really up on the top of the list. It's one of the things, but in that specific case, I wouldn't have agreed with that specific pain compliance measure. Like there could have been other things she could have done. She could have, instead of holding her biceps, out like this, she could have at least get her to try to turn her on her stomach, and we could have gone from there. But the pinching, not so much. But like, I mean, just a simple fact of the matter, my jaw was on the floor for the first 2 weeks when I was there, just because the amount of stuff that the women have, but on the other point, a lot of the stuff that the women don't have, like they don't get treated with respect, period. My whole philosophy is we're all human. I treat everybody with the same respect, unless you make me not do that.